The crystal chandeliers of Le Bernardin cast golden shadows across the marble floors as Marcus Jefferson carefully arranged the silverware on table 17. His dark hands moved with practiced precision, each fork and knife placed exactly 1 inch from the table's edge. At 28 years old, Marcus had worked in Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant for 3 years. But he had never once served the tables near the windows, where the city lights sparkled like diamonds. Those tables were reserved for what the manager called presentable staff. A code that Marcus understood all too well. The evening rush was beginning, and the restaurant filled with the familiar sounds of clinking glasses and hushed conversations about million-dollar deals. Marcus watched from his assigned corner section as the other servers greeted guests arriving in designer suits and evening gowns. His section consisted of 4 tables tucked away near the service corridor, where the restaurant seated what they considered their less important guests. Despite speaking 5 languages fluently and holding a degree in hospitality management that he'd earned through night school while working 2 jobs, Marcus was invisible in this world of privilege and power. Mr. Harrison Clark, the restaurant's general manager, strutted through the dining room like a peacock displaying his feathers. At 53 years old, with silver hair slicked back and a permanent sneer etched on his pale face, Harrison had made it clear from Marcus's first day that he was hired only to fill a diversity requirement. "You should be grateful," Harrison had told him during that first humiliating week. "Not many establishments of this caliber would even consider someone from your background." The words still burned in Marcus's memory, but he had learned to swallow his pride. His mother, Eleanor, was battling cancer, and the medical bills were drowning his family. This job, despite its daily humiliations, paid better than anything else he could find. That particular Tuesday evening started like any other until an elderly German couple entered the restaurant. The woman, Frau Ingrid Müller, must have been in her 70s, with gentle blue eyes that reminded Marcus of his late grandmother. Her husband, Hans, supported her arm as they were led to one of the prime tables by the window. Marcus noticed the woman's hands trembling slightly as she tried to explain something to James, the head waiter assigned to their table. James, a young man who had never worked anywhere else and whose father was friends with Harrison, was growing visibly frustrated. His face reddened as he kept shaking his head, unable to understand what the increasingly distressed woman was trying to communicate. Marcus could hear fragments of German mixed with broken English from across the room. The woman was saying allergy repeatedly, her voice rising with panic. She was pulling out what looked like a medical alert bracelet, pointing at menu items. Her husband trying to help, but clearly not speaking much English either. James threw his hands up in exasperation and called for Harrison, who approached with his typical air of superiority. "What seems to be the problem here?" Harrison asked, his tone already dismissive. The German couple tried again, the woman now with tears forming in her eyes, desperately trying to make them understand that she had a severe seafood allergy that could kill her if she ate the wrong thing. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. For 3 years, he had kept his head down, accepted every insult, every degrading task, every moment of being treated as less than human. But watching this elderly woman struggle, seeing the fear in her eyes as she tried to protect herself from a potentially fatal allergic reaction, something in him refused to stay silent. He set down the water pitcher he was carrying and walked across the dining room, feeling Harrison's eyes burning into his back. When he reached the table, he spoke. In perfect German, "Guten Abend, Engittage, Frau. Wie kann ich Ihnen helfen?" The woman's face transformed instantly, relief flooding her features like sunrise after a long, dark night. "Sie sprechen Deutsch," Frau Müller exclaimed, grasping Marcus's hand with both of hers. In rapid German, she explained that she had a severe shellfish allergy that could trigger anaphylactic shock. She needed to know exactly what was in each dish, as even trace amounts of shellfish or seafood stock could be fatal. Marcus listened carefully, then turned to translate for Harrison and James, who stood frozen in shock. "She has a life-threatening seafood allergy," Marcus explained calmly. "She needs to know which dishes are completely free from any seafood products, including stocks and sauces that might contain shellfish derivatives." He then proceeded to go through the menu with Frau Müller, explaining in German which dishes were safe and suggesting alternatives that the kitchen could prepare specially for her. The entire restaurant had gone quiet. Every eye was on the scene, unfolding at table 3. Harrison's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "Jefferson," he hissed through clenched teeth, "return to your section immediately. You are not authorized to serve these tables." But Frau Müller held on to Marcus's arm. "9-bit," she said firmly, then switched to English for Harrison's benefit. "This young man just saved my life. Do you understand? I could have died." Her husband Hans stood up, his own anger now evident. "We have been trying to explain. For 15 minutes, no one would listen. This waiter is the only one who showed intelligence and compassion." At table 12, near the back of the restaurant but with a perfect view of the entire scene, a woman in her 40s sat alone, observing everything with sharp, calculating eyes. Victoria Sterling wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, though you wouldn't know it from its understated elegance. As the CEO of Sterling Global Enterprises, a company worth several $billion, she had learned long ago that the best way to judge a business was to watch how it treated its most vulnerable employees and customers. She had been coming to La Bernardine for the past 2 weeks, always alone, always watching, considering whether to add it to her portfolio of hospitality investments. Harrison's voice cut through the tension like a rusty blade. "Jefferson," I said, "return to your section now." His voice carried across the entire restaurant, ensuring maximum humiliation. "You seem to have forgotten your place. You're here too. Serve water and clear plates, not to play translator." Marcus stood his ground for a moment, looking at the elderly couple who watched him with concern and gratitude. "I was just trying to help prevent a medical emergency, Mr. Clark," he said. Quietly, that's what any decent person would do. The word decent hung in the air like an accusation, and Harrison's face darkened further. "Your job is to do what you're told, not to think. If you can't remember that, perhaps you should find employment elsewhere." The threat was clear. Marcus thought of his mother lying in her hospital bed, depending on his insurance to continue her chemotherapy treatments. He thought of his younger sister, Jasmine, who was in her final year of college, the first in their family to get that far. He couldn't afford to lose this job, no matter how much it killed him inside to accept this treatment. "Yes, Mr. Clark," he said, lowering his eyes. "I apologize." As he turned to walk back to his section, Frau Müller pressed something into his hand. It was a $100 bill. "Kaka," she whispered in German. "You are a good man. Don't let them take that from you." Victoria Sterling watched Marcus return to his corner section, his shoulders straight despite the public humiliation. She noticed how his hands didn't shake as he picked up his water pitcher and continued his work. She noticed how the other minority staff members, Maria, the Latina hostess, Chen, the Asian busboy, Rashid, the Middle Eastern server, all looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and shared understanding. She noticed how Harrison made a point of walking past Marcus's section repeatedly for the rest of the evening, making cutting remarks, loud enough for other customers to hear. "Some people just don't understand professionalism," Harrison would say. "They think speaking a foreign language makes them special." What Victoria noticed most of all was that Marcus never once lost his composure. When a child at one of his tables accidentally spilled juice all over the floor, Marcus cleaned it up with a smile, making the embarrassed parents feel at ease. When an elderly man struggled to read the menu in the dim lighting, Marcus discreetly offered a small flashlight he kept in his pocket. When a young couple celebrating their anniversary mentioned they were teachers on a tight budget, Marcus quietly spoke to the kitchen and had a complimentary dessert sent out. All of this while Harrison continued his campaign of degradation, assigning Marcus extra cleaning duties, criticizing his posture, his walk. Even the way he held the serving tray, Victoria pulled out her phone and sent a message to her assistant. Full background check on Marcus Jefferson at La Bernardine. Also investigate Harrison Clark and the restaurant's employment practices. I want everything by tomorrow morning. She had built her empire by recognizing talent in unexpected places, by seeing potential where others saw only the surface. In Marcus Jefferson, she saw something that Harrison Clark was too blinded by prejudice to notice: a natural leader. Someone who remained dignified under pressure, who showed initiative and compassion even when it came at personal cost. The next few days became a masterclass in systematic workplace abuse. Harrison, clearly threatened by Marcus's display of competence, escalated his campaign of humiliation. He scheduled Marcus for split shifts that made it impossible to visit his mother in the hospital. He assigned him to clean the employee bathroom during peak dinner hours, ensuring other servers had to cover his tables and split his tips. He accidentally knocked over Marcus's tray twice, forcing him to pay for the broken dishes out of his wages. Through it all, Marcus documented everything in a small notebook he kept in his locker, not knowing what he would ever do with it, but feeling somehow that keeping a record mattered. On Thursday evening, Victoria Sterling returned with a small group of potential investors. She specifically requested to be seated in Marcus's section, which threw Harrison into visible confusion. "I'm sorry, Miss Sterling, but that section is typically reserved for our casual dining guests. Surely you would prefer one of our window tables." Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. "I prefer table 17. I find the view of the entire restaurant quite educational." Harrison had no choice but to comply, though he immediately pulled Marcus aside. "Don't you dare embarrass me in front of these people," he whispered viciously. "Serve them and keep your mouth shut. No showing off." As Marcus served Victoria's table with his usual quiet professionalism, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A Japanese family had arrived, parents with 2 young children, and were struggling to communicate with the hostess about their dietary restrictions. One of the children appeared to be crying, clearly overwhelmed by the strange environment and the language barrier. The father was showing something on his phone, possibly a translation app, but the hostess just kept shaking her head in frustration. Marcus watched Harrison approach, his face already set in an expression of annoyance. Without thinking, Marcus set down his serving tray and walked over. "Konbanwa," he said gently to the family in Japanese. "Watashi wa Marcus desu. Tetsudai dekamasu ka." The relief on the family's faces was immediate. The mother nearly cried as she explained in rapid Japanese that their daughter had celiac disease and couldn't eat any gluten, while their son was vegetarian for religious reasons. Marcus translated quickly and efficiently, helping them understand the menu and working with the kitchen to ensure their meals would be prepared safely. The little girl, who had been crying, smiled at him and said arigato in the sweetest voice. Harrison's explosion was immediate and volcanic. "Jefferson," he roared, not caring that the entire restaurant could hear. "That is the last time you abandon your station without permission. You're fired. Clear out your locker and get out of my restaurant." The Japanese family looked horrified. The mother trying to explain that Marcus had only been helping them, but Harrison ignored her completely. "3 years I've tolerated your presence here," Harrison continued, his voice dripping with venom. 3 years of watching you pretend to be something you're not. You want to know why you serve the back tables? 'Cause that's where you belong. That's where people like you have always belonged." The silence that followed was deafening. Every Customer, every employee stood frozen in shock at the naked display of bigotry. Marcus stood very still, his mind racing through the implications. No job meant no insurance. No insurance meant no treatment for his mother. But as he looked around the room, seeing the faces of his coworkers who had endured similar treatment, seeing the shock and disgust on the customers' faces, something crystallized within him. "People like me," Marcus said quietly, but his voice carried. "You mean people who speak 5 languages? People who work their way through college while supporting their families? People who treat every customer with respect regardless of what table they're sitting at?" Harrison's face was nearly purple now. "You know exactly what I mean. Now get out before I call security." But Victoria Sterling stood up from her table, and her voice cut through the tension like a sword through silk. "Actually, Mr. Clark, I think you should be the one leaving." She walked forward, her presence commanding the room. "My name is Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Global Enterprises. As of this morning, I am the new owner of Billionaire." The shock on Harrison's face was almost comical. That's impossible. The owner would have told me." "The owner was quite happy to accept my offer," Victoria continued smoothly. "Especially after I shared with him the extensive documentation I've gathered about your discriminatory employment practices." She pulled out a folder from her bag, thick with papers. 3 weeks of surveillance footage showing you segregating staff by race. Recorded conversations of you making explicitly racist comments. Testimony from 17 current and former employees about systematic discrimination. Financial records showing discrepancies in tip distribution that mysteriously favor white employees. Would you like me to continue?" Harrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You can single quotes this is." "What I can do," Victoria said calmly, "is ensure you never work in the hospitality industry again. What I will do is file charges with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. What I should do is pursue criminal charges for the wage theft you've been conducting." She turned to Marcus, who stood frozen in shock. "Mr. Jefferson, I've done extensive research on you. Bachelor's degree in hospitality management from City College. Graduated magna cum laude while working 2 jobs. Fluent in English, German, Japanese, French, and Spanish. Currently pursuing your MBA through online courses that you pay for yourself. You've been published twice in hospitality journals about inclusive service practices. Tell me, why are you wasting your talents here?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "My mother. She needs the insurance. She has cancer." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "Your mother will have the best care money can buy. As the new general manager of La Bernardine, you'll have full health coverage for your entire family, plus a salary commensurate with your actual qualifications." The room erupted. Several customers began applauding. The Japanese family's father was recording everything on his phone. Maria, the hostess, was crying. Chen and Rashid were grinning widely. Harrison looked around wildly, seeking support, but found only contempt in every face. "You can't do this," he screamed. "I have contracts. I have rights." "You have 10 minutes to clear out your office," Victoria replied coldly. "Security is already waiting in the lobby." "Oh, and Mr. Clark, that comment about people like you belonging in the back, that was recorded by 3 different customer phones. I imagine it will make quite an impression when it goes viral." As security escorted a ranting Harrison out of the restaurant, Victoria turned to address the staff and customers. La Bernardine will be closing for 2 weeks for renovations and staff training. When we reopen, we will be an establishment that values diversity, competence, and basic human dignity. Every employee will be evaluated based on their skills and performance. Nothing else. Mr. Jefferson will be leading this transformation. She looked at Marcus. That is, if you accept the position. Marcus thought of his mother, who had cleaned office buildings for 30 years, always telling him that education and hard work would open doors. He thought of every night spent in the library, learning languages while his friends were out partying. He thought of every humiliation he'd endured, believing that somehow, someday, it would lead to something better. "I accept," he said, his voice strong and clear. "But I have conditions." Victoria raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." "Every employee who is discriminated against under Harrison gets a raise and a formal apology. We implement blind tip pooling to ensure fair distribution. We create a scholarship program for employees' children, okay? And we establish a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind." Victoria smiled, a genuine smile this time. "You're going to be expensive, Mr. Jefferson. I accept all your terms." As the restaurant slowly returned to normal, with customers finishing their meals and staff returning to their duties, Marcus stood in the center of the dining room where he had been humiliated so many times. But now, instead of shame, he felt something else entirely. Vindication. Frau Müller, who had been watching everything from her table, approached him once more. "Ich habe nie aufgehört, and Sie zu glauben," she said softly. "I never stopped believing in you." She pressed another piece of paper into his hand. This time, it wasn't money. It was a business card. "My son owns a chain of hotels in Germany. When you're ready to expand internationally, call us." As Marcus looked around the restaurant that had been his prison and was now his responsibility, he thought of the title of this story that would define his transformation. Black Waiter Spoke. German to Customer Billionaire saw it and left ticket and note. But the real story wasn't just about speaking German or impressing a billionaire. It was about maintaining dignity in the face of degradation, about competence triumphing over prejudice, about the moment when someone finally sees your true worth. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the restaurant early, using his new key to unlock the doors. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the space in a way he'd never seen before. He'd always arrived when it was still dark, leaving through the back door after the last customer had gone. He walked slowly through the dining room, running his hands over the tables he'd been forbidden to serve. Standing at the host station where he'd never been allowed to greet guests, his phone buzzed with a message from his mother. "Jasmine told me everything. I'm so proud of you, baby. Your father would be too." Over the following weeks, the transformation of Le Bernardin became legendary in Manhattan's restaurant scene. Marcus hired back several talented servers who had been driven away by Harrison's racism. He promoted Maria to head hostess, Chen to restaurant supervisor, and brought in a diverse team of professionals who spoke a combined 15 languages. The restaurant began offering menus in multiple languages, and staff were rewarded for language apprent of the viral video's comments section, where thousands of people had shared their own stories of overcoming workplace discrimination. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Marcus found himself standing by the window tables he'd once been forbidden to approach. The city lights twinkled below, but he wasn't looking at them. He was watching the reflection in the glass, a young black man in a manager's suit, surrounded by a diverse team of professionals who respected him. In a restaurant that had become a symbol of what was possible when competence was valued over prejudice. The title of his story, Black Waiter Spoke German to Customer Billionaire Saw It and Left Ticket and Note, had become more than just a headline. It had become a testament to the power of speaking up, standing firm, and never letting anyone convince you that you belong in the shadows when you were born to shine in the light. The transformation of Le Bernardin rippled throughout the industry, inspiring other establishments to examine their own practices. Marcus was invited to speak at conferences, sharing his experience and advocating for inclusive hiring practices. He never forgot to mention the elderly German couple who had inadvertently catalyzed his journey, or Victoria Sterling, who had seen his potential when everyone else saw only his skin color. But most importantly, he never forgot the years of humiliation that had preceded his triumph, using them as fuel to ensure that no one under his leadership would ever experience what he had endured. The boy who had learned German in a public library at dawn while his mother cleaned offices at night had become a symbol of what was possible when talent was recognized regardless of its packaging. And in the end, that was the most powerful note any billionaire could have left, the proof that justice, though sometimes delayed, could indeed be delivered.